So I'm a game designer and a phenomenologist, I just learned. It's really exciting, yeah, I love it. Oh my gosh. This was on purpose. Okay, I have a question for you guys, and you're gonna hold your answers until the end. And then we're gonna find out who actually has the right answer, and there'll be a prize. What does Tom Cruise have to do with the first video game, Space War? Okay, I don't know if you'll be able to Google this. I teach here, actually, at the New School, and one thing that I found out is that phone reception in this space is really impossible, right? I think it's the sort of belly shape that keeps everything out. I feel like we're in a whale or something. Okay, so I not only teach here, I run a research lab called Pet Lab. I also have a pet lab. And I'm a member of Local Number 12, the Union of Design and Play. We were recently, our Twitter account was recently followed by the Republican Party. I think they think we're a real union. Don't tell them. I'm working on a variety of different projects. I'm going to go through these really quick because I want to get to the meat, which is stuff that you can take away and think about and argue about with me later. One of the projects I'm currently working on has you fighting with books. Nothing better than fighting with books, right? It is an iPhone game, and it's called Lost Words, and it'll be out in about 5 months, but that probably means a year. I've worked with my partners at Local Number 12, who include Eric Zimmerman and John Sharp, on a project called the Metagame, which is a game about culture, where you debate the merits of culture, everything from Crocs to a Big Mac to this one here, Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. I guess one of the interesting questions might be which has been more influential, Pong or Fountain? I've worked on curriculum. This is a shot of some of the curriculum we developed at the Boys and Girls Clubs called Game Tech. And this is curriculum so that you can make your own games. And I'll talk a little bit about why I think making games is really good for your brain. I'm working on a project funded by the Knight Foundation called Data Toys, where we're making toys out of data, trying to describe the systems underneath the news, like how things actually work by playing with them. Budget ball is a physical or quote-unquote fiscal sport played every year on the National Mall between college students in the Congressional Budget Office in the White House. I'll let you know that so far, college students have won. They've got a straight record of winning against the Congressional Budget Office. That might tell you something about the state of our finances here in the United States. But it is a game about the federal deficit. Talk about a heart-poundingly exciting topic, right? Don't you just want to... Well, we made it into a sport which actually is a little bit fun, so I think we made it heart-pounding in its own way. And I've worked on a project also through Pet Lab. This is a Pet Lab project called Reactivism, which is a game that has you revisit the history of activism. It's been played in New York, in Philadelphia, in Beijing, in Minneapolis, and this summer we're going to create a version for Atlanta, Georgia. So any of you hail from the South, we'll be down there. Yeah, South. Okay. Finally, I'm working on a set of projects with the Red Cross. We're creating games for disaster risk reduction and disaster preparedness. This is a shot of our trip to Namibia last summer, playing a game called Ready. So anyway, back to purposeful play. So that just gives you a sense of who I am, because I'm not really famous, and you probably have never heard of those projects. So I came up with the title for this talk. Lance called me and he was like, what do you want to talk about? I was like, oh, I'll talk about play. He's like, okay, that's not enough. Let's add something. And I was like, purposeful play. Little did I know that somebody came up with this already. Maslow. You might be familiar with that pyramid of needs, right? The hierarchy of needs. That's Maslow. And wow, isn't this perfect? It just sort of fits right into the talk and into what you guys are all thinking about today, giving yourselves time to cultivate, and that is creativity. That almost all creativity involves purposeful play. That's as far as I'm going to get to defining what purposeful play is. I'm not actually quite sure. I was thinking of it along the lines of making games that give you some sense of the world. And maybe I'll talk a little bit more about why I think games are uniquely suited for this. One of the interesting things to me about games is that really, as a game designer, all we're doing is making rules. And I mean, that sounds like what am I, a dictator? You know. But it's only with the presence of rules that play can emerge. And I know that you think about, like, when you're thinking about creativity, you think of what are some constraints, some great constraints to help us come up with new ideas. Constraints are helpful. Well, that's what games are, right? They're just rules. And then the game actually doesn't exist. Talk about phenomenological. The game doesn't exist until it's played. The game's just a set of rules. So, you know, something like this. Right? I could play against you and we could see who wins. Rock, paper, scissors. So to me, it's that beautiful kind of dichotomy between rules and play that makes games so interesting, right? That there's this sort of rigid side, the black and white side over here, and then within that, we push against those rules. We try to understand where are their boundaries. And ultimately, play is kind of subversive, right? We're really trying to see how far we can push those rules and still be playing fair. And it's through that we learn more about how a system works. One of my favorite people in the world and favorite quotes is from Bernie DeCoven, who wrote a wonderful book that's about to be re-released through MIT Press called The Well-Played Game. And I love this because I'm not going to read it to you, you can read it here. But the thing about it that I love is that games are useless, spontaneous, they're an embellishment on the shape of necessity. And I think that because we're playing with the idea that games are not necessary, right? They're inconsequential. That's where real consequence emerges for us personally, emotionally, in a variety of other ways. So I think I just love the fact that what I make is useless. This is something that Bernie contributed to with Stuart Brand, who you might know from the Whole Earth catalog. Is that what it's called? I think so. And it's the New Games movement. What's so interesting about the New Games movement is not only that the games are kind of a lot of fun, they're very 70s, a lot of touching, sitting on each other's laps, you know. I'm not sure we're allowed to play these games anymore, but have you ever, when you were in school, have you ever played with the parachute? Oh my God, like forget it, I didn't want to do anything else. That was a new game that came out of the early 70s through the New Games movement. And the New Games movement was a comment on the Vietnam War. Those parachutes, they're military technology, but they used them in a different way and subverted their meaning through playful engagement. Bernie, I've also heard him say that all play in public is political. I would take it a step further and say all play is political. So let's go back before the 1970s. We're getting into like ancient history. So, you know, 6000 BC, let's say. We had a variety of different things that we did as a culture. We're doing a lot of them today, still. We told stories, and we played games. These are from, I think, 6500 BC. You know, I think the six-sided dice might be the oldest technology that we still use in exactly the same way. But these two things existed as kind of complements to each other. We can tell our stories about things, right, to help us understand them. Or we can play a game. And games help us understand the things that just seemingly go against linear storytelling. Like randomness. The randomness of the universe, right? Probability. That's hard to tell a story about that, but get a pair of six-sided dice and you learn about them through experience. So I think that games exist prior to even written culture for kind of deep reasons and help us understand the world in a different way than other forms. This is a sport. Sports hold different significance. Does anyone know this particular match? The Battle of the Sexes. Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs in the 70s. I remember a little bit of that. So games also, in the context of culture and context of society, have different meaning. So let's talk a little bit more. Let's get kind of under the hood about how games mean. That was a little bit of the history, right? Games have existed for a really long time. I think we're thinking about them a lot now because we actually have game designers now, right? We don't know who designed Go or chess or poker even though that was designed in the 1800s in its modern incarnation with gambling. So games have been a folk culture until the dawn of video games. Games are the pop cultural medium of systems, right? They take this sort of thing that's hard to kind of understand. Systems aren't readily viewable all the time, can't see them, but we know they're behind how things are. But games are systems where you're an active participant and you poke and prod at things and you get feedback, and there are feedback loops. As a designer, you use those loops as a kind of paintbrush. Positive feedback, negative feedback. But games are the kind of pop cultural medium of systems. The idea that we see all of these kind of symptoms of systems is really kind of found in the headlines in the news, right? You know, temperatures are increasing. There's something behind that, right? And I think in order to solve the wicked problems or create wicked solutions, we have to really try to understand the systems underlying the problems we have today. A great book, Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. I assign it to all of my students. It's a wonderful introduction to how to develop that kind of systems thinking approach. Games are also about something called failure. Okay? Now here's the crazy thing. The game designer's craft is making failure fun, right? And games teach us that failure can unveil new things about the game. We learn new strategies, we learn new things. We can watch this for about 30 minutes and it doesn't get much further than this. I want to like grab the controller and help them. But that idea of like failure and embracing failure, and failure being kind of the element of games that kind of gives it a fun aspect, is really, I think, interesting. Yeah, I know. You'll go crazy watching that. And then I think this is my last point, empathy, all right? Now, you don't always associate this idea of empathy with the kind of systems thinking and kind of analytical approach to things. But I think it comes out in games in particular at this moment. This is in Abu Dhabi. I was working with a group of youth to teach them how to make games. And this is when they're playtesting each other's games. And you see the person who made the game in the Popeye shirt here, pointing and they're telling, no, don't go there, do that. Cardinal rule, you're not supposed to do that when you're playtesting your game. You're supposed to sit back and be calm and watch the other player struggle, go the wrong way, do the wrong things. It's excruciating. But the only way to make a game is to playtest it. You cannot make it and put it out there. It has to be, as I said, a game doesn't exist until it's played. You can't see the game until you see someone playing it. And that's about empathy. That's about paying attention to what someone's doing and not pointing at the screen and saying, don't do that, go there. But being able to sit back, take the pain, and empathize with the player. And try to understand, how do I make this game more accessible, more pleasurable, whatever it might be. Oh, I had another one here. Choice. I heard someone talking about choice earlier today. A common saying in the game design field is a game should be a set of interesting choices. Right? What kind of choices are you giving your players? There should always be some kind of interesting, excruciating, challenging, painful choice in a game. David Foster Wallace I'm a fan of. And if you replace writer and reader with designer and player or any of these things, this quote really is kind of profound, right? It's our jobs, whether you're a writer, a filmmaker, a product designer, a game designer, whatever it is, to wake people up to how smart they are, right? You're not telling them how smart you are. You're waking them up to the smarts they've got inside. And I think that that's profound, and that's really, if you can do that, you're doing something really special. All right, who knows the answer to the Tom Cruise space war question? Raise your hand. Oh, yes, one person thinks that. Can you say what you think the connection between Tom Cruise and space war is?
They both believe they're fighting aliens?
Yes. No. I like that answer. That's a great answer. Yes. Oh, that's not fair. All right. They're both 51 years old. So yeah, both Tom Cruise and games are in their middle age. Video games, that is. We know that games are really super duper ancient. But that's kind of amazing, right? It's a medium now finding its stride. So I'm just going to show you a couple examples. Of course, everybody cites this, like, oh, graphics were so clunky, and now look how realistic they are. You can see the blood spurting out of someone's head. I get squeamish. This is what a lot of people think when they think of games. How many of you actually are gamers? Raise your hands. All right, a very small portion. All right, gamers, yeah. A lot of people, though, I bet all of you are. I bet you all play something, whether it's on your iPhone or you play a board game with your friends, whatever it is. You're all gamers. That term is problematic. That term conjures up visions of Dorito dust and people speaking Elvish. We're all gamers, right? You're also all game designers because you may not be doing a lot of it now, but when you were younger, I know you raised your hand and was like, oh, I have an idea for a different rule, right? Okay, so these are the games that people think of a lot now, but there's a new dawn happening in the game world. This is Minecraft. I don't know, I think Notch, the individual who created this game, made over $500 million. It's kind of an outlier, but it's an amazing game, and a lot of people are playing it. It's like a virtual Legos. Here's some games that I think are pretty cool. This is one, Papo-Io. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly. Papo-Io? Yeah. Which is kind of an incredible allegorical tale of a child and their alcoholic parent. It's kind of got a lot of magical realism in it. But it looks kind of like a conventional game, right? It's got a lot of that's obviously live footage, but it's got a lot of the kind of high-end graphics that we're used to. Over here on the left, this one playing now, Renga is a really interesting game. How many of you have played Renga? Oh yeah, we've got some folks. You kind of have to find it playing at a theater near you. It's a game for 100 players with laser pointers. It's pretty amazing, and you have to coordinate and cooperate. Unmanned is this one over here is one of my favorite games from last year, made by Molindustria, Paolo Pedercini. It's about being a drone pilot, the life of a drone pilot. It's really profound and beautiful. You can find it for free to play on the internet. And then finally, JS Joust, Johann Sebastian Joust, is a game played with PlayStation Move controllers. But there's no screen. You're playing the game by trying to push the other person and get them out. So it's kind of a classic playground style game, but involves this sort of video game console technology in a really new way. Yeah. It's amazing. It's like pretty intense. You're supposed to protect it and not have it get jostled. Yeah, I've been injured playing that game. But this is just a sample, right? These games all look different from what you might imagine in your head as video games. But they're all part of that culture. It's a really exciting time. 51 years later, we're making games that I think are really interesting, that tackle challenging issues, that do interesting things with technology and being social. And so I just invite you to dive in, raise your hand proudly when I say, who's a gamer? Yeah. You know, join me in the revolution. Thank you.
I just started making all these inside jokes with myself about people out there who actually are doing evil. So everyone, you know, out there who we associate as an other, as a bad guy, aren't they just as innovative? And how come their practices aren't being studied? How come we're not celebrating their own creativity and innovation? So the misfit economy really evolved out of a very simple joke.